And here's the detail that changes everything. They did it on the exact same day American and Iranian diplomats were sitting across a table in Geneva trying to negotiate a nuclear deal. One team is in Switzerland talking about diplomatic principles and enrichment limits. Another team is in the Strait of Hormuz, firing missiles and closing one of the world's most critical waterways. This is not miscommunication inside the Iranian government. It is a deliberate, carefully constructed dual-track strategy. And it is working precisely as Tehran designed it to work. Understanding why Iran chose that specific day, that specific hour, is the key to understanding everything unfolding between Washington and Tehran right now in February 2026. Let's start with what actually happened on February 17th, because the specific details carry far more strategic weight than any headline has fully captured. Iran's IRGC launched a drill called the Smart Control of the Strait of Hormuz, which had begun a day earlier on February 16th, with naval forces mobilizing near the waterway. The exercise was staged from 4 Iranian islands sitting directly inside the strait: Abu Musa, Greater Tunb, Lesser Tunb, and Siri, positions Iran has controlled since 1971. Iranian state media reported missiles fired simultaneously from coastal launch sites and ships, striking targets in the strait, while drones ran electronic jamming simulations overhead. For several hours on February 17th, parts of the strait were closed. Iran's Fars news agency cited safety and navigation principles during the live fire phase of the drill. Jakob Larsen, chief safety and security officer at BIMCO, which represents global ship owners, said the closure would cause minor nuisance and delays to inbound shipping, no major disruptions. That framing significantly undersells the strategic weight of what Iran actually demonstrated that day. And here is why the market response did not capture the real significance of the event. This was the first time Iran announced a formal closure of the Strait of Hormuz since the U.S. began its current military buildup and explicit threat posture toward Tehran in early 2026. The Times of Israel described the move as rare, perhaps unprecedented, in the strait's modern history, and analysts close to this file consistently confirm that framing is correct. The last time Iran genuinely closed this waterway was during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, when both sides mined the water and attacked tankers in what became the Tanker War. That historical context transforms February 17th from a drill footnote into a live demonstration. The power to close this strait is real, exercisable, and deployable during active diplomacy. Now add the layer almost no outlet is connecting directly to that same day, because this is where the strategic picture sharpens into something far harder to dismiss as routine posturing. On the exact same day the strait was partially closed, Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei posted on X what became one of his most widely viewed statements in years, with 3.5 million views in 24 hours. He wrote that while a U.S. warship is a dangerous piece of military hardware, what is more dangerous than that warship is the weapon that can send that warship to the bottom of the sea. His official website reinforced the message by publishing an AI-generated image depicting the USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest carrier, heavily damaged and sinking beneath the surface. In a second post, Khamenei added that even the strongest military force in the world may at times be struck so hard that it cannot get up again. No weapon named, just absolute confidence. The IRGC Navy commander added his own detail. The weapons Iran would use on the day of war are not necessarily the same as the equipment used in exercises. That sentence is worth sitting with. What this suggests is a message engineered to operate on multiple decision-making levels simultaneously, aimed at Washington's Situation Room, oil markets, and naval commanders in the Arabian Sea. To Washington, we are at the table in Geneva, but we are also in the water. Both are true at once. The strait is not off the table just because diplomats are exchanging proposals in Switzerland. To global oil markets, the strait can be closed, not in theory, but on a Tuesday afternoon during active nuclear diplomacy with the most powerful conventional military on Earth right now. And to the carrier task force, the weapons you have not seen demonstrated publicly are the ones that matter most. The drill you watched was not the full picture. Plan accordingly. In my view, the most revealing detail of February 17th was not the drill itself. It was how oil markets responded in the hours immediately after the Geneva talks wrapped up that evening. Brent crude stayed near $67 per barrel. Traders exhaled. Iran's foreign minister said good progress had been made. The diplomatic headline temporarily overwhelmed the military signal from the strait. But the capability Iran demonstrated on February 17th never went away. It was absorbed into the market as background risk, priced in at essentially zero premium, which is exactly where Tehran needed it. This is the architecture of coercive diplomacy. Demonstrate capability publicly during negotiation, then let the diplomatic headline reduce immediate tension, while capability remains fully intact. The threat doesn't need to materialize to function. It just needs to exist at a level credible enough that every decision maker in Washington must account for it quietly in every scenario they model. Now let's look at the full military picture, because the strait closure is only one layer of a considerably more consequential standoff as of February 22nd, 2026. As of this week, the U.S. has 2 carrier strike groups converging on the region. The USS Abraham Lincoln has been on station in the Arabian Sea since late January, operating at sustained high tempo. On February 15th, satellite imagery placed the Lincoln approximately 422 miles south of the Iranian coast, well within range for its F-35Cs and F-A-18 Super Hornets to strike targets inside Iran. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest carrier, crossed the Strait of Gibraltar on February 20th and is now transiting the Mediterranean, expected near operating range within days. CNN's military analysis confirmed at least 18 F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters stationed at Muwafiq Salti Air Base in northern Jordan, visible in satellite imagery, alongside EA-18 Growler aircraft. CBS News tracked more than 50 U.S. aircraft flying east from American bases in just 8 hours on February 19th. The same logistic signatures seen before Operation Midnight Hammer against Iran in June 2025. Trump called the combined force an armada, telling reporters bad things would happen if Iran doesn't make a deal, even as the force assembled and the Iranian missiles were still in the air over Hormuz. Both realities existed simultaneously on February 17th. Neither canceled the other. That is not confusion. It is the negotiating environment both sides have deliberately built for themselves. One side of the Iranian government sits in Geneva discussing guiding principles. The other side posts AI images of sinking carriers. Both serve the exact same strategic objective from Tehran's perspective. Do you think Iran's military demonstration during the Geneva talks was a calculated negotiating signal, or something that suggests the diplomatic track may already be running on borrowed time? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this kind of analysis is what you come here for, hit the like button. It tells me to keep going deeper into what the headlines leave unexplained. In part 2, we're going to look at what Iran is doing underground right now while diplomats talk, and why new satellite imagery shows Tehran may be racing to harden its most critical assets before any deal is signed. Here is what makes the satellite images released this week more significant than almost any diplomatic statement coming out of the Geneva talks right now. While negotiators were exchanging proposals in Switzerland, Iran was racing underground, literally burying its most sensitive nuclear infrastructure before any deal could be signed or any strike ordered. A Washington-based nuclear watchdog, the Institute for Science and International Security, published a detailed assessment this week based on Planet Labs imagery taken across multiple sites in early February. Their conclusion was precise. Iran has been sealing, hardening, and concealing tunnel entrances at 3 of its most critical nuclear and military sites simultaneously since the start of this month. At Isfahan, struck by U.S. B-2 bombers during Operation Midnight Hammer on June 22, 2025, the imagery tells the clearest story of what is actually happening beneath the surface right now. By late January, 2 of the 3 tunnel entrances to Isfahan's underground network had been completely backfilled, dump trucks and heavy earth-moving equipment working around the clock at the site. By February 9th, ISIS confirmed the 3rd entrance had also been buried. All 3 access points to the underground tunnel complex at Isfahan are now, in the Institute's own words, completely buried. ISIS assessed that backfilling those tunnel entrances serves 2 simultaneous strategic purposes going well beyond simply hiding the facility from overhead commercial satellites. First, compacted soil above a tunnel entrance absorbs blast energy before it reaches the structure underground, making any future precision airstrike meaningfully less destructive to what is stored inside. Second, it physically complicates a special forces raid aimed at seizing or destroying enriched uranium that multiple diplomats have confirmed is stored in the underground section of the Isfahan complex. David Albright, ISIS founder, posted about this on X with language more direct than most of what has appeared in mainstream coverage of this standoff over the past 2 weeks. He wrote that Iran has been busy burying facilities that may soon become, in his exact words, fully unrecognizable bunkers with significant protection from aerial strikes. Stalling talks, he added, has its benefits. Jonathan Hackett, a former U.S. Marine counterintelligence officer, told the New York Post the Isfahan work reflects a larger push to create defensive layers in anticipation of a possible U.S. strike. In my view, that phrase, defensive layers, is the most accurate description of what the satellite record shows across all 3 sites as of February 22, 2026. Now let's go to the site analysts describe as the most strategically significant piece of Iran's nuclear infrastructure going into these talks. It is called Pickaxe Mountain, officially Ku-e-Kolangazla, a granite peak in the Zagros Range, approximately 1 mile south of the Natanz nuclear facility in central Iran. Its full strategic scale was first publicly revealed in 2023 through imagery analyzed by the Associated Press and the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, though construction had begun back in 2020. Experts at the James Martin Center estimated the facility as being built between 80 and 100 meters deep inside hard granite rock. Not loose soil, not poured concrete, solid mountain granite. That depth is the most important number in this story. America's most powerful conventional bunker-busting bomb, the GBU-57, penetrates approximately 60 meters of earth before detonating. Not 80, 60. The GBU-57 weighs 30,000 pounds and can only be carried by a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. It was used in combat for the first time during Operation Midnight Hammer against Fordo and Natanz in June 2025. Pickaxe Mountain is granite, not loose earth. Its estimated depth puts it at or beyond the known operational limit of America's most advanced penetrating weapon. There is currently no conventional answer to that gap. Gerecht of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies stated it plainly. The site is designed to give Iran a nuclear facility that the U.S. Air Force would have difficulty destroying with its largest conventional bombs. The Alma Research Center's February 11th assessment noted construction there has been accelerating since the June 2025 strikes, not pausing for active diplomacy, actively accelerating through January and into February. When complete, ISIS estimates the complex could house several thousand centrifuges, enough to sustain enrichment entirely beyond the reach of both international inspectors and any existing penetrating aircraft. And here's the detail that connects Pickaxe Mountain directly to the Geneva talks, one almost no mainstream outlet ran alongside its diplomacy coverage last week. On February 12th, 3 days before the second round of talks, the U.S. Air Force published documents revealing a new $100 million sole source contract with Boeing to replenish its GBU-57 bomb stockpile. Boeing is the only manufacturer of the weapon. Competitive bidding was waived. Urgent acquisition. Published in the exact same week Geneva was being scheduled and announced to the public. That document and that diplomatic timetable, running in parallel, is a coincidence that military planners rarely allow to appear by accident in publicly accessible government procurement records. Now, let's go to the third site, Parchin, because what imagery revealed there in the past 60 days is the most visually striking data point in this entire pattern. Parchin is a military complex 30 kilometers southeast of Tehran, linked for over 2 decades to high explosive testing relevant to nuclear warhead detonation research. Iran consistently denies this characterization. Israel reportedly struck Parchin in October 2024. By late November 2025, a new steel skeleton was visible, reconstruction that analysts initially treated as standard post-strike repair work at a known sensitive site. By December 2025, a metallic roof appeared over the skeleton, still visible, still trackable, still within the expected range of what post-strike reconstruction normally looks like to experienced satellite analysts. But by February 16, 2026, the building had disappeared, hidden under what ISIS is formally calling a concrete sarcophagus, then covered with soil, color matched to the surrounding terrain. The analyst at Contested Ground confirmed the structure was deliberately buried under earth, engineered to appear visually indistinguishable from its surroundings when viewed from orbit by commercial satellites. Inside that buried structure, ISIS identified a long cylindrical chamber, approximately 36 meters long and 12 meters in diameter, visible in imagery captured just before the concrete covering was completed. ISIS noted that containment chambers of this size are, in its exact language, critical to the development of nuclear weapons, while carefully adding, they can also be used in conventional weapons research purposes. Iran denies seeking nuclear weapons, and the Institute was explicit that imagery alone cannot confirm the facility's intended purpose, but the choice to bury this specific structure carries its own analytical weight. When you look at Isfahan, Pickaxe Mountain, and Parchin together, not as 3 separate items, but as one coordinated pattern, what the satellite record shows is not cleanup or routine post-strike reconstruction. It is a systematic hardening campaign, closing access points, pushing assets deeper, concealing structures under blast-absorbing materials, precisely timed to coincide with a diplomatic window that buys time. The most important question here is not whether Iran is violating the spirit of the Geneva process. The deeper question is what this pattern reveals about how Tehran actually views the range of possible outcomes. Iran is preparing for 2 outcomes at once, a deal, and the scenario where military action follows even after an agreement is reached, exactly as Operation Midnight Hammer followed prior diplomatic frameworks in 2025. Both scenarios are rational for a government that watched its own facilities bombed, then sat across from the country that ordered those strikes, to negotiate a new framework under an explicit military deadline. Every week of negotiation is a week of additional hardening in concrete and granite. Albright's phrase about the benefits of stalling is not abstract. The satellite record confirms it is happening in real time. The $100 million GBU-57 procurement, published 3 days before Geneva, tells us Washington understands the same race is underway and is hedging in exactly the same direction Tehran is hedging. Both sides are running the same dual track, one hand extended across the table in Geneva, the other quietly preparing the tools that make the table relevant or irrelevant, depending on how the next few weeks unfold. Coming up next, the financial picture underneath all of this. Understanding the economic pressure on Iran right now changes how you read every move Tehran has been making since these talks began. Here is the detail almost nobody is connecting to the military standoff in the Strait right now, and it may be the most consequential factor driving this entire negotiation. Iran is not negotiating from strength. It is negotiating from the edge of an economic collapse that has been accelerating for months and is now hitting the Iranian population in daily life. At the time Iran signed the 2015 nuclear deal, $1 traded for about 32,000 Iranian rials. As of February 2026, $1 buys more than 1.4 million rials on the open market. That is not a temporary dip. It is the accumulated result of years of maximum pressure, war, reimposed sanctions, and domestic mismanagement compressed into a single number that tells the whole story. The World Bank projected in October 2025 that Iran's economy would contract in both 2025 and 2026, with annual inflation rising towards 60%. Official Iranian data put inflation at 42% in December 2025. Food price inflation was running above 70% year on year, according to House of Commons library analysis published this week. Meat has become a luxury item for large parts of the Iranian population. GDP shrank in the spring quarter of 2025, according to the Statistical Center of Iran. Excluding petroleum, the contraction deepened to negative 0.4%. Agriculture fell 2.7%, the first contraction in 4 years. In late December 2025, the government eliminated the preferential import rate of 285,000 rials that had covered food, livestock feed, and fertilizer in an attempt to stabilize the foreign exchange market. The New Humanitarian documented what followed. Catastrophic price increases across basic goods within days. Merchants at Tehran's Grand Bazaar shuttered their businesses and took to the streets. Protests beginning with bazaar merchants on December 28th spread to all 31 Iranian provinces, including areas historically loyal to the state, becoming the largest unrest since the 1979 revolution. This is where the economic picture connects directly to Geneva and explains precisely why Tehran is at the diplomatic table in February 2026 at all. Oil exports are the primary source of Iranian government revenue, and that revenue base is being systematically compressed by a continuous documented sanctions campaign running in parallel with the Geneva talks. Since Trump issued National Security Presidential Memorandum 2 in February 2025, the U.S. has sanctioned over 180 vessels connected to Iran's shadow fleet, the network through which Iran sells oil to buyers in Asia. Iran's oil moves through older vessels with obscured ownership, ship-to-ship transfers in international waters, and relabeled cargo. Shipping analytics firm Vortexa calls it a mature, optimized parallel supply chain. Vortexa confirmed Iran has been sustaining exports of roughly 1.3 to 1.6 million barrels per day through the system, even after UN snapback sanctions were reimposed in September 2025 by France, Germany, and the UK. But every barrel sold through that network comes at a steep discount. Buyers demand lower prices to offset legal risk. Each newly sanctioned vessel raises the logistics cost of every subsequent shipment that follows. Iran Open Data estimated that in the fiscal year ending March 2025, Iran earned approximately $23.2 billion from oil exports, but could have earned over $28 billion at benchmark prices. That $5 billion is not abstract. It is the direct yearly price Iran pays just to move its own oil, before a single nuclear centrifuge enters the diplomatic conversation in Geneva. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stated the strategy plainly in a March 2025 speech at the Economic Club of New York. He said maximum pressure was designed to collapse Iran's already buckling economy. His exact words, on the record, while diplomacy was already being explored. Those words, designed to collapse, are not editorial framing. They are a direct quote from the sitting U.S. Treasury Secretary, delivered while diplomatic contacts with Iran were already underway at the same time. In my view, that is the single most important piece of context for understanding why Iran is at the table in Geneva right now, 5 days after it closed the Strait of Hormuz during live nuclear talks. Tehran is not there because aircraft carriers convinced Khamenei. It is there because a rial at 1.4 million to 1, food up 70%, and a population in the streets is a threat that military posturing cannot answer. Economic pressure is doing what military pressure alone rarely achieves, creating a genuine internal deadline inside Tehran that no carrier group in the Arabian Sea can manufacture on its own. Now here is what makes this structurally difficult to resolve. Any deal with enough relief to stabilize Iran's economy must be substantial enough to visibly move the rail. But that level of relief requires Washington to loosen the maximum pressure architecture built over a year, which reduces the leverage the U.S. retains the morning after any agreement is signed. That gap between what Iran needs economically and what Washington is willing to concede strategically is the real negotiation. The enrichment numbers in Geneva are the technical framework. The economic relief terms are the actual substance being decided. Underneath all of this sits China, absorbing Iran's sanctioned oil exports through the shadow fleet and small independent refineries, despite repeated rounds of U.S. sanctions directly targeting Chinese buyers by name. China buying Iranian oil at a discount is commercially rational. Below-market crude reduces China's energy import costs at a time when its own economy faces considerable downward pressure. The result is an economic triangle requiring no formal treaty. Iran needs Chinese buyers to keep revenue flowing. China benefits from discounted crude, and both need the Strait open. In my view, this financial architecture, not the enrichment percentages in Geneva, is what makes a fast resolution genuinely difficult. Any deal has to fix the economics, not just the centrifuges. Coming up next, what a deal would actually look like from both sides, and why the distance between each party's minimum position may be smaller than the public posturing on both sides currently suggests. Here is the one fact about the Geneva talks that explains everything else, and that neither side has stated in plain language to the public. After 2 rounds of indirect negotiations, the U.S. and Iran have not agreed on a single concrete number, not an enrichment level, not a sanctions timeline, not a verification threshold. What they agreed on was a phrase, guiding principles. Araghchi announced this after hours of indirect talks on February 17th, with Omani officials carrying messages between the 2 delegations in separate rooms. A U.S. official confirmed progress was made, but noted there are still a lot of details to discuss. In diplomatic language, details typically refers to the things both sides still cannot agree on. No enrichment level was set, no sanctions timeline announced, no verification plan outlined, no date for a 3rd round confirmed. Both sides went home to draft texts separately and exchange them at a later point. So let's look at what each side actually needs to claim at the end of a final deal, because those minimum positions tell you whether any agreement is structurally achievable at all. Washington has publicly demanded 0 enrichment. Iran permanently halts domestic uranium enrichment and dismantles the infrastructure that enables it. That is the stated U.S. red line going into every session. Washington also wants constraints on Iran's ballistic missile program and an end to its support for armed regional groups. Trump said publicly, days before Geneva, that regime change in Iran would be, in his words, the best thing that could happen. Tehran has publicly refused to permanently give up enrichment. It argues it has a legal right to civilian enrichment under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that permanently surrendering that right is not politically survivable at home. Iran has also declared its ballistic missile program completely off the negotiating table, a position Khamenei restated explicitly while Geneva was actively running. Khamenei stated this explicitly on February 17th, while Geneva was actively running, telling reporters Iran's missiles have nothing to do with the United States. What Iran reportedly offered, according to the Soufan Center's February 19th assessment, was a suspension of enrichment for 3 to 5 years, a time frame that extends beyond Trump's current term in office. Tehran reportedly also offered to eliminate its 407-kilogram stockpile of 60% enriched uranium, near weapons-grade material described by the IAEA as central to the technical side of the current discussions. In exchange, Tehran demanded immediate and full sanctions, relief the moment any deal is signed, a requirement U.S. negotiators have reportedly and categorically rejected, per media reports, citing officials on background. That gap, permanent 0 enrichment on one side versus a 3 to 5 year suspension on the other, is a structurally different outcome. Not a technical gap skilled diplomats can easily close in a 3rd round. Here's the insight from Ali Vaez of the International Crisis Group that almost no coverage has engaged with, and that reframes the entire logic of this negotiation. Iran has not operated a single centrifuge since Operation Midnight Hammer in June 2025. What the U.S. is asking Iran to formally surrender is something the bombs already temporarily took away through military force. Washington is asking Iran to convert a coerced military outcome into a permanent legal commitment, making what force produced look like a voluntary concession in a signed document. Making what happened by force look like a voluntary concession in a signed document is a very different political ask than giving something up from a position of strength. There is one more signal from Geneva worth noting, and almost no outlet has flagged it as the signal it actually represents. Iran reportedly broadened its team to include economic development officials, not just nuclear and foreign ministry experts, signaling what Tehran is actually prioritizing in a final deal. Iranian leaders are reportedly offering broad U.S. access to the Iranian market as part of the deal package, a direct appeal to Trump's stated interest in transactional economic outcomes. It is a direct appeal to Trump's stated interest in transactional outcomes that produce visible economic wins, not just security concessions that are hard to explain domestically. In my view, this is the most analytically revealing signal from Geneva, more substantive than the guiding principles language that led all the headlines. Tehran has been studying Trump's political incentives as carefully as his military posture, and is trying to build a deal he can describe as an economic opening, not just a security concession. Now let's look at the 3 realistic paths forward from February 22nd, 2026, because this is where the story stops being history. The first path, a partial deal where Iran suspends enrichment, removes its uranium stockpile, accepts IAEA monitoring, and offers market access. The U.S. provides phased sanctions relief. Neither side achieves everything, but both can claim something real in front of their domestic audience. The second path, a prolonged standoff where talks continue while Iran hardens its underground facilities and Washington keeps sanctioning the shadow fleet. Economic pressure on Tehran deepens with every week the deal doesn't close. At some point, one side blinks, or the third path becomes operative. The third path needs no elaboration. Both sides know what it is. What matters analytically is that it tends to arrive not through deliberate decision but through miscalculation. A drone too close, a radar lock misread, a ship in the wrong lane at the wrong moment. The Strait of Hormuz was already closed once during these negotiations, on February 17th, during active diplomacy. Military assets from both sides are operating in the same geography, with a narrow margin for error. The most important thing to take from this entire story is not any single number or event. It is the pattern running underneath all of them. Every actor in the standoff is simultaneously running the diplomatic track and the preparation track. Both tracks are real. Neither cancels the other out. Every handshake in Geneva is matched by a shovel underground or a procurement notice in a government database, and both sides are fully aware of what the other is doing. That is not cynicism. It is what rational actors do under genuine uncertainty about an adversary's intentions and their own tolerance for risk. The question that remains open, answered not in Geneva, but in the weeks after any third round convenes, is which of those preparations each side ultimately has to rely on. If you stayed through everything we covered today, the strait, the underground facilities, the economic pressure, and the negotiations, drop a comment below. Which of the 3 paths do you think this ends on? And if this kind of analysis is what you come here for, subscribe and hit the notification bell to make sure you catch everything that comes next. Because whatever comes next, in the strait, in Geneva, or underground in the Zagros Mountains, we will be here when it does.